Good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth in our webinar series. We are presenting this five-part series, The Best of Two Worlds, in partnership with Friends of the Muskoka Watershed. It is about how Indigenous values and mainstream science-based principles can work together to better sustain our planet. Before we begin today, I would like to give you an insight into the Indigenous exhibit that we at the Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center are opening in 2023. Our strategic goal is to weave Indigenous culture and sustainability values into the fabric and identity of the Muskoka Discovery Center, and to also serve as an example for Canada. We were most fortunate that Dan Longboat introduced us to Tim Johnson. Tim is extremely accomplished. At the Smithsonian Institute, he directed exhibits and programs at the National Museum of the American Indians facilities in both Washington and New York. He also facilitated, in conjunction with Al Gore, the Live Earth, Mother Earth program held in July 7th, 2007, broadcast around the world to increase public education and awareness about the impacts of climate change. It stands as one of the Smithsonian Institute's most widely viewed public programs. At his home community in Six Nations of the Grand River, his many accomplishments were recognized in 2016 with the Dreamcatchers Foundation Award for Arts and Culture. So we are thrilled that Tim agreed to be the project director of the exhibit Muskoka Confluence of Cultures. Tim, over to you.
Each year, millions of visitors travel to the Muskoka region, most of them not knowing about the area's deep and rich Indigenous history, a history that extends back many thousands of years. From the earliest Indigenous peoples who inhabited Muskoka as the ice retreated, living amidst the waters and lands abundant with fish, game animals, and nutritious plants, through the settlement of First Nations communities, including those of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples, Muskoka, land of red earth, gained reputation and status as a gathering place, a confluence of cultures. That's why I was delighted to learn that the Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center was adding a new wing to its museum, and that within this wing would be a gallery permanently dedicated to educating the public about the Indigenous experience in Muskoka. And it has been my distinct honor and pleasure to have led a team comprised of Indigenous scholars, cultural resource and language specialists, and museum professionals in developing an interpretive plan outlining the concepts, themes, and structure of the exhibition to ensure its authenticity and accuracy. Now, a lot of work remains, but it is my sincere hope that you will help support the exhibition's development and join us on opening day for celebrations when that day arrives. Let us share that vision, one that restores Indigenous culture and sustainability values back into the fabric and identity of the Muskoka region. It's important that we repolish the covenant chain of friendship and meet our obligations to truth and reconciliation. Yahweh.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Miller, President of Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, The Best of Two Worlds. We would like to acknowledge the First Peoples who, for thousands of years before us, were and are still the keepers and caretakers of this land where we now live and work. We're dedicated to honoring the Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. In particular for Muskoka, all four cultures, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Métis that inhabited these lands either currently or historically. We recognize all the generations of Indigenous people and their historic connection to this place, and we're grateful for the opportunity to gather here at this time. So as Gary said, this webinar is a 5-episode series. This is episode number 4. We've had over 500 people in our audiences for the first 3, and 195 registered for this one at last count. So thank you all for joining and supporting us. The series is a collaboration between Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center and the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed, where we discuss sustainability with an Indigenous perspective. Together, we discover how Indigenous practices and Western science can contribute to a healthier planet. By gaining a better understanding of these two approaches, we can improve the potential for a more sustainable future. Our webinar will begin shortly, during which we encourage you, our audience, to post questions in our Q&A function during the webinar, and then we'll read them to the presenter afterwards. If your question's already been posted, or if you like a question that you see there already, click like on that question and it'll be moved higher in priority. We don't have enough time to get to all the questions we have had in the first three webinars. So if we don't get to yours, you can email it to us in the address that we post in the chat, and we'll work on getting that answer to you. I'd like to introduce two members of our team, Jordan Waynes and Ann Curley, who are working behind the scenes to make this webinar happen today. And now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Norman Yan to introduce our speaker. Norman.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone to the fourth webinar in our series. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce a much admired and appreciated colleague, David Pearson. David is an import from Newcastle in the midst of the cornfields of Northern England. Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister when he came. He is now an emeritus professor, that's David, not Pierre Trudeau, in the Faculty of Natural Science at Laurentian University. After a restless career that began with 30 years of teaching geology and a 6-year spell as project director of Science North, the Science Centre in Sudbury, and many hours in front of a TV camera as host of one of Canada's first correspondence courses. He left the geology department 20 years ago as a co-founder of the Laurentian University Science North graduate program in science communication. I think it's still unique in Canada. And also became involved provincially and federally with the growth of climate change adaptation efforts. And I'll tell you, when David says involved, it means a lot. It's an understatement in his case, because he always chooses to lead on matters that are important, in my experience. David began traveling to the communities of remote First Nations 13 years ago, with an eye to learning about the impacts of climate change on the well-being of people in the North. And he's been learning ever since, along with a small team at Laurentian that is currently part of a larger collaboration with 5 Northern Tribal Councils and Ground Council Treaty Number 3. David told me that being on the same speaking platform as Henry Lickers is beyond the wildest imagination of a boy from the banks of the River Tyne. I turn it over to you, David.
Well, my goodness, no. Thank you so much for that very friendly introduction. I'm pleased to tell you that I'm speaking from the traditional territory of the Tekmasheng First Nation, just west of the city that we now call Sudbury. They have been stewards of this land for generations, long before Sudbury came to be and long before I arrived. So I'm grateful, like all of my fellow citizens should be grateful to the Tekmasheng First Nation. I want to share my screen and tell you right away that, here we go, that I have a subtitle for my presentation, which actually picks up on a word that you just used in your second last sentence there, Norm. The story of a learning curve, because I feel a little bit like a grad student who's speaking amongst a list of eminent professors, and not only overawed by Henry Lickers coming next week, but by you having started the series, and then Sue and Neil and Don and all of the the predecessors in this webinar series. It really has been a learning curve, and it still is a learning curve. And I'm pleased to be able to tell you about it, because I think that it might give you insights into how to combine, how to contribute, because that's what we're trying to do, how to contribute our science knowledge to the knowledge that's in the First Nation communities that we're collaborating with. And those First Nation communities are in nearly half of Ontario, more than 40% of Ontario, some on the Mid-North Shield, that you see on the left diagram here, the left photo, most on the Far North Shield, and some on the Hudson Bay lowland, right as far up as Hudson Bay. So we're collaborating with tribal councils and through them their communities for over an area that is important to Ontario, but very, very few people know much about. So part of what I want to do is to weave in some sort of general knowledge of the far north as I speak about the particular issues that we've been engaged with. On the right, you'll see the names of many of the communities we're working with in green, and the dotted red lines are the winter roads, the ice roads that those communities depend on to get construction materials in, to get diesel in for running their power plants, for bringing in food as well, in tractor trailers, in large vehicles that can travel on those ice roads. There are 28 communities down near Kenora in Grand Council Treaty 3 that we're also collaborating with that are not on this map. So you can see how big a chunk, how big an area of Ontario the First Nations inhabit. And we should all know much more about them. And I hope that some of the takeaways today will not so much be the science, but be what the well-being of the people up there. I'm speaking on behalf of a team, our team at Laurentian University, our up north on climate team, and also then a team of what we call climate change specialists from the tribal councils, Roxanne and Chris and Geneva and Erica, Christina and Vivian, although I can tell you that Chris has gone back up to his community Fort 7 to be, I think, deputy chief, and Erica was purloined by the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation because of the climate change knowledge that she'd built up, having been part of this project for nearly 2 years. So we are a bigger team than just Laurentian. The climate change specialists are part-timers, the rest of us are full-timers, and the group together is called PICA, the Partnership for Indigenous Climate Change Adaptation. And I show you that name and the logo on this photograph from Wapakika, the community of Wapakika, which is sort of mid-north. It's up near Big Trout Lake or Kitchener-Makasip-Inninewug, for those of you who know the north, because on that bus, it is highly likely that the young man who designed our logo was riding when I was there 3 years ago. He's now at high school down in Sioux Lookout, but he designed our logo, 17-year-old. We had a competition and he won it, and he's now benefiting from $450. That was the prize for the logo. But that logo being designed by a young person is very much fitting with the approach that we've taken to engaging with communities. It's the young people who will have to live with the consequences of the pollution that has been put in the atmosphere that's causing climate change. They've had nothing to do with it, but they're going to have to live with the consequences of it. In Sudbury, just looking at the starting point for my learning curve, science and technology are very, very focused on extraction, very focused on taking out the wealth of the earth. Nickel prices are at a 10-year high, so there's even greater effort going on now to extract more nickel. A very, very extractive approach to use of the earth. And of course, we're benefiting, as some of you may know, from the extraordinary event, the arrival of a meteorite or perhaps a comet, nearly 2 billion years ago, nearly half the lifetime of the planet ago, that resulted in the molten rock welling up into the bottom of the crater that brought with it the ore that we're exploiting. The consequences of that approach to the use of science, or the focus of the use of science and technology on extraction, can be seen in this photo. That was once a wonderful white pine in the foreground, now lost its grandeur and lost a lot of the soil over its roots too. You can see its exposed roots. In the background is the technology, which is 3 generations of technology, actually, 2 of which are are the small stack on the right. I'm seeing if I can wave my, yes, here we go. I wonder if you can see that. I hope so. This is one of the small stacks that was the source of a great deal of the pollution. And it was a source of pollution when I came to Sudbury. I remember running from the parking lot to the nearest door, nearest entrance to the university to escape the fumes from this and two other stacks. This taller stack, the super stack of Sudbury, took over from those small ones, and it too now has been decommissioned. And there's a third generation of much more efficient technology, the two little white stacks that are off to the right as you're looking at the super stack. So there's been a price to pay, an environmental price to pay, that that has resulted from our approach to our focus in Sudbury of using science and technology for extractive purposes. But that's where I'm coming from. That's where I start and where I'm starting from. There are the three stacks. You can see the pollution. You may have seen this photograph before. This is the second generation of technology, the super stack, and there you're looking down at the super stack, the two white third generation stacks, and one of the old ones that's still around. And there's lots to talk about on this photo, and we don't have time, but part of what you might notice is that here are people's backyards. This is not industrial technology that is hidden off in the distance from where people live. Here is Coppercliff, and I think that there are some of you who know Coppercliff. But that too is part of the way that technology has been used in Sudbury. The consequences of it, the sad trees, the statuesque remnants of trees standing, and one lying, which must be several tens of feet long, lying in the foreground here. This is what our approach to the use of science and technology did to the environment in Sudbury. It made the environment barren enough that astronauts came here because the surface rock was exposed and showed the kind of geology that they anticipated finding on the moon. They didn't come because it was barren. They came because they could see the rocks easily. And you can see the super stack on the right there puffing out its smoke. They were here in 1972. The super stack had just been commissioned. This is the difference today. And if you look at the rock on the right that Charles Duke and John Young were working around, you'll see it back here 50 years later. And the vegetation is obviously a great deal healthier. This is a pine tree that was planted as part of the revegetation program. But everything else you see, the birch and the poplar and other greenery has come back naturally. Now, part of what you might think is that the ecosystem has recovered, but the ecosystem has not recovered. If you get down on your hands and knees and you've got the expertise, you can see what's missing from the ground, what's missing from the if you like, the grass layer, the ground layer, the mosses and lichens and the small plants. But there has been a recovery, but it's not enough. And at the end of this presentation, I want to put some words to why it's not enough, and quote an author who I'm going to recommend you spend some time on in your homework. Says the so-called astronaut hill that now is so much healthier than it was. And people are proud of this, and so they should be. And Peter Beckett, one of my colleagues who's been a leader on this exercise for 40 years, deserves all the accolades that come his way. But there's more to do. And this is a measure of the change in another place. It so happens that our future mayor was one of the school kids who came out to the slope by St. Hubert's School, and is here being interviewed later after to become a city councillor and then a mayor. So there's a real what can one say? There's a community memory of what had to be done in order to at least restore the visual character of the landscape around Sudbury. Part of what I also went into the far north with was, as Noel mentioned, my experience at Science North. Here is the building that I hope many of you recognize on the corner of Ramsey Lake. And that gave me a chance to really hone my understanding of outreach to communities. And that's been a very, very important element in what we've been able to do to build collaboration and to contribute our science knowledge to the knowledge in First Nation communities. And part also of what Science North encouraged, but also I practiced in my first year geology classes, was storytelling. Storytelling is crucial. And this is the ice that covered Canada just a few tens of thousands of years ago. Here it is 9,000, 10,000 years ago, melting back. And we don't have time to go into why it was melting back, but it had to do with the orbit of the Earth, not greenhouse gases. And there was a time when the water would enable you to paddle out from the middle of the Sudbury Basin out to the Great Lakes. And this is what it looked like at the time. And part of what I'm trying to do here is to show you how useful it is to put science into a story that relates to the area where people are. So this is a story that I would tell to students in the Fraser Auditorium at the university, and have told at Science North and told in other places where Sudburyans go to listen to people chatter. And part of what is also important to take to the north is that this sequence of events, the melting of the ice, showed how alive the land is. This is looking down from a flight to Toronto some years ago now, looking down at rocks that are appearing in the lake, no vegetation on them yet. Then they're newly appeared because the land is rising. The land is rising because of the weight of ice that was removed from it, just like taking off the cargo from a ship. And in Sudbury, we're rising at about 6 millimeters a year. So Science North has risen measurably since it was built. And up in Fort Severn, or actually this I think is Pewanak, not Fort Severn, but Fort Severn is just over here. These are the two most northerly communities in Ontario, rising at about 13 millimeters a year. In fact, rising faster than sea level is rising, because Hudson Bay, of course, is connected with sea level, rising faster than sea level. So the coastal plain is expanding. The land is so alive. The land is so alive that it's pushing back rising sea level. All of those are sort of starting points to the learning curve that I've been on for the last 13 years. And my first visit was to this community, which we call, and I don't like to call, but the anglicization of it is Fort Hope, but it's a Yubmatung First Nation, and it's not that far north of Thunder Bay. It's about a third of the way up to Hudson Bay, but this was the first community I went to, and I went there because Andy Fion on the right, who was at the time the director of the Geological Survey, and a wonderful photographer, by the way. That's his photograph on the left. And I have photographs of him lying on his belly, photographing ground level flowers. He was a director of the Geological Survey at the time, phoned me up one day and said, "David, I'm flying up to Yubmatung, and I've got a spare seat on the charter plane. I think you ought to come along." I was a geologist, he was a geologist. We know each other, and we knew each other, and still know each other actually. And I, of course, said yes, absolutely. So I went along, and Andy was my mentor. And when you take on something as challenging as engaging with a a people with a different way of seeing, a different way of knowing, and with different cultural background, and with other historical issues that we have to take account of. Andy was wonderful as a mentor, and one needs a mentor. And it was fortunate that I was working at the Lake Center here on Lake Ramsey, and Andy Fionn was the director of the Geological Survey just across the road. So without that coincidence, without us knowing each other, I might never have gone into the far north, and I certainly would not have had Andy Fionn as a mentor. So part of what I say to students is that, you know, luck is a very important part of life, and this was a lucky move for me. And it was partly a lucky move because Andy Fionn had written this piece that he calls the ethical engagement of with First Nations in Ontario's far north, and you could see his words, and I've highlighted the ones that are most important: meaningful communication, relationship building, mutual learning, not going in top down, but going in to learn. And in our case, we're working from bottom up: respect, mutual interest, synergies, and realizing that the combination, the collaboration of traditional knowledge and science is a powerful way of yielding what he's called here a rich and holistic view of the subsurface and surface of the earth. And Andy's particular interest, of course, was geology and rocks, and that's the way he phrased the benefits. And this is how he wrote about them. This is part of an official piece that he put together for others in the OGS, and you can see there, without me needing to emphasize on the scope of the importance of the communication and the community engagement that Andy was so good at. And this is back in 2007, so it's not something that just appeared last year. And this is how Andy met with people in the community. He walked the community. He was seen and wanted to be seen and wanted to talk and chat. He was informal. I remember one government person flying in coming in from the plane that he'd flown in. He was dressed in a suit and tie. He came with a briefcase. He was there for the day, and I saw him going out at 3 in the afternoon. That was not Andy's style. Andy's style was to engage with people, talk with people, and listen and learn and become recognized as in some cases, I'm sure he became a friend, but at least to be recognized as somebody who respected the people of the community that he was in. And here he is doing his official thing with council members and band staff. That was part of what Andy, of course, was there for, to talk about the geology and the greenstone belt that's in the neighborhood of Yubmatung. And this is a community meeting that with members of the community, some young people and some older people. And it was here that I realized that one of the community leaders had been in residential school. And I didn't know anything about residential schools. I'd been in Canada for, heavens, 30 years and didn't know anything about residential schools. I'm frankly a little ashamed that I didn't. I should have done, but I didn't. And this was the place where I first discovered that one of the people in this photo, a senior staff person in the Yubmatung band office, had been to residential school. And I became conscious of that. And I'm going to show you one other photograph of a residential school in a moment. This is how Andy interacted with kids. Showed them the camera and then lent them the camera. And Andy was, well, he was known as Uncle Andy to some of these kids. I heard them call him Uncle Andy. There was another Andy in the band office, and he was Andy 1, and Andy Fionn was Andy 2. So they had colloquial names for each other. And what can one say? That relationship and respect for kids was something that that I learned from immediately. And as a result of that, in a later visit when I was up there without Andy, I took up the young student who's on the left photo there, holding the garter snake, James Baxter Gilbert. James Baxter Gilbert is now a faculty member at Mount A. He went on to from the science communication program to Australia and South Africa, got a PhD, got married, and I actually got married before he left. I was at his actually at his wedding. I remember now as I'm talking. But Andy was a storyteller. James was a storyteller, and proud of it, and damn good at it. And he held kids, as you can see, on the edge of their seat with the way that he spoke with them. And James has a stutter, and he won't mind me telling you that he has a stutter, but that has not stopped him. To be honest, I think it's got better. I was at a presentation of his just a week ago, and he's a magnetic storyteller. He really is, and was so valuable in building our connection. This is our project's connection with Yamatung, and part of what Andy did, it was also to sort of mimic Andy Fion's connection with the community. He went in to help cook and serve breakfast. 400 kids he served breakfast for, and he's putting a tree in the back of a bus that they went off to plant somewhere. James was an ambassador par excellence. And as I've said, and I'll emphasize just one more time, a wonderful, wonderful storyteller. He put science into stories, and that's what one needs to do with science. Don't talk textbook science. Don't go in to deliver science. Go in to tell stories that make science come alive. The other person that I met who turned into an amazing mentor for me was Xavier Saguch. And sadly, Xavier just died in November. He was a wonderful photographer, as you can see from the photographs of his on the wall behind him there. An amazing photographer. But it was from Xavier that I learned so much about the ways of seeing of First Nation people. I had no firsthand experience of talking with First Nation elders who lived close to the land until I met Xavier. Xavier went every year for a 2-week canoe trip on the Albany River, and he was obviously an observer of nature because of the photographs that he took. It was from Xavier that I learned so much about the community, and I spent hours with Xavier writing the questions that we used in order to write reports about the climate change vulnerability of communities in the North. And I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. Part of what we did was we did some nice things for Xavier. We took his photographs and made them into posters, and he loved that because he didn't have the facilities to do that in the band office. So we worked with Xavier in a very collaborative but also sort of informal and friendly way. In 2016, I shouldn't say 2016, we were very fortunate and found some money from the provincial government, and it was from the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. It had not been that ministry for 10 years. It had been Indigenous something, and a couple of years later it went back to be Indigenous something. But we were very, very conscious of being, and we thought of ourselves as sort of Ontario ambassadors for the reconciliation process. So we wanted to behave in a way that would enable reconciliation with First Nations in the North. And part of what we did, as I mentioned, was we wrote reports. That was our deliverable for the money that we received, or one of them. And this is the one that we wrote in 2017. Somehow the dates got chopped off there, with Xavier as the prime source of information and inspiration, to be honest. And this is one of the experiences that Xavier spoke about that is a reflection of one of the major climate changes that's taking place in the North. He went through the ice on his snowmobile at a time of year in 2009, beginning of December, when he would have expected the ice to be thicker. There are people now who go fishing from boats in the first week of December, not every year, but some years. And that's one of the pieces of evidence, firsthand experience evidence, that shows one of the ways that climate is changing in the North. The ice is not as thick, it's not as safe as it used to be, and it's not as available for bringing in goods as it used to be. And this is another house, another home in Fort Hope, the Yamatom First Nations community, that shows a problem. There's a mold problem in that house, and the people there have health issues because of the mold. The house is just not properly sited, it's not properly located, and the gravel bed on which it's placed is not thick enough. And as a result, every time the ditch fills with water, then it gets damp. At the other end of this road, there's actually a house that was built in a depression. And the person who was going to move into that house, and I know who it was, and he was a senior person in the community, told the contractor, "This is crazy. Why the hell are you building my house in here? And you're going to have to fill this with gravel before you put the house here." And the contractor just blew him off. "I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone." And those sorts of stories that tell you about the attitude that sometimes brought into, well, not, yeah, sometimes, okay, let's stick with sometimes, brought into First Nation communities by outsiders from the South is so damaging, and it makes you mad to hear it, but it happens, and it's happened in other communities that I've been to as well. Almost exactly the same thing. Homes being built in stupid places that will flood. Part of what is also an issue with changing climate that was evident in Fort Hope, although not seriously in this photograph, is rapid spring melt and rain in the spring, rain in late winter, periods of rain. And in this case, the ditches become clogged with frozen debris, and water spreads on the road. And in this case, it didn't get very far, but it gets under the road, it freezes, it becomes icy, and it's the cause of traffic accidents. Part of what Xavier was also able to do was to use his knowledge of the places where ditches cause problems in communities, and the places that I've shown you photos of are on this sketch. He was able to provide that information for the report, and we put that together with the layout of the community, and we're able to show that the drinking water treatment plant, which is here and draws its water from the lake from a line that goes out for about a couple of 100 feet, I think it is, was possibly being contaminated by the surface water draining off from the community, and you can imagine what's in there. I mean, there are lots of dogs in the community, and there's all sorts of debris and garbage and so forth and so on, and that water being flushed off into the lake far too near to the intake for the drinking water treatment plant. Those are the sorts of issues that go along with climate change that complicate and are deleterious to the life in northern communities. Xavier was also able to draw this map of where flooding had occurred in 1959. And there were 2 or 3 other people in the community who knew about the flood in 1959. Fort Hope, Yubmatung was not laid out as a community until 1962, but there were people who were living in homes that they'd built for themselves and were living in their traditional tent structures. And this was a flood in 1959. And when we looked at what that flood must have meant, because this is where the land is, this was flooded, and this is flooded. And these homes were built in, I think, the late 1980s or maybe even the 1990s, and clearly were vulnerable to the level of flooding that Xavier told us about and drew that sketch of. And we couldn't figure out how or what would cause the water in the lake and the Albany River, which is close by, to rise that much. Because it's this is not a couple of feet. This is more than a meter and a half. And we found in the weather records that indeed there had been a very heavy rainfall, and there'd been a melt of snow, but it didn't seem to be enough. And but it clearly needed to be understood if it indeed is climate change, because these houses might have been built on the floodplain of the lake. And if that's the case, then they're vulnerable, and there needs to be some thought given to how to protect them. However, we looked into the situation, and what we found was that Ontario and Manitoba in 1958, in other words, just a year before the flood, had agreed to put a dam that would remove the headwaters, Lake St. Joseph, the headwaters of the Albany River, and divert it into the English River system in order to generate more power for Manitoba. Nobody told the residents of Yubmatung about this, and nobody told the residents of Yubmatung the next spring, 1959, when the residents of the shoreline of Lake St. Joseph complained that the high water from the heavy rain was flooding their gardens and their homes. So what did the Lake of the Woods Control Board do? It just opened the dams, and it sent a huge flood of water down the Albany River. Did they tell anybody in Yubmatung? No, not a soul, not a soul. So this was not a climate change incident. It was a water control incident. And it was a reflection of the lack of respect being shown to the people who were not yet living in the community of Yubmatung, but were indeed living on the location of Yubmatung. And so that is another issue that one needs to be aware of when one's looking at what is real climate change and what is not real climate change. And I found that in other places too. And in other places where graveyards were flooded with the consequences that you might imagine. So with Xavier's help, we began to compile these reports. And I show you this. This is I guess it's the Attawapiskat First Nation report. And I'll tell you before going any further that these reports were confidential to the community. We regarded the knowledge on which they were based, which came in answer to these questions. And there were about 45 of them that Xavier and I spent hours and hours writing and rewriting, and Xavier thinking about and talking about. And that knowledge then was someone in the community, and in the case of Yubmatung, it was Xavier, interviewed 13 people. Other places it was 10 or 15 or 9. Interviewed them with a recorder and passed that information. The recorders, sometimes they had to make notes. They didn't want a recorder, use a voice recorder. And we then wrote reports like this one here based on that information. But as I say, the knowledge belonged to the knowledge holders who lent it to us. And we wrote reports for the community, confidential to the community. We didn't even give them to the tribal council of which the community was a member. and I think they're still using them. And there was we wrote 24 of these altogether, which was quite a task, I can tell you. But they've been the starting point for ongoing adaptation actions in the north, and we're pretty pleased with how that worked out. And this is the kind of way that we, on paper in a spreadsheet, integrated the information we got. And I want to distinguish that information from the knowledge that comes from the different way of seeing that First Nation people have. This is information, observations by people who were there at the time. And we called it TEK and community observations. We should just have called it community observations. They were, in a way, they were monitors rather than looking at the situations with Indigenous with an Indigenous eye. And you can see some of those down the left-hand side here: river water, cloudy, snow geese and waterfowl, etc. More cormorants. I'll show you the pieces of this so that you understand how this worked. So on the left-hand side, the input from people, which we shouldn't have called TEK because it's less than TEK. It's just observations of people who were there at the time. And then any sort of technical follow-up, any circumstances that were known about the change. Then the projections. This is the science that we fed in. What are the projections for the future circumstances for those observations? Then we went to the risks and the after adaptation risks. This is sort of integrating the observation with the projections, and then we came to the end. This is where the community needed to become involved. This is where there needed to be community discussion, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the tools that we've developed, the resources we've developed for that part of the process. And this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. The information that comes from science and the information that comes from people who observed the change is information. After that, here then come the community's decisions and the community's priorities and the values of the community that they want to see protected in the actions that they take in the face of the changes that are coming, or that they've seen the thin end of the wedge of, that are going to get worse. Part of this is it's also from Fort Hope. This is the Albany River in the background here. It's that river that was suddenly charged with all the water that was let go from the dam in 1959. And this is an illustration of one of the ways that the land being alive, this land is rising, right? It's rising somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7, maybe 8 millimeters a year. And that means that rocks that were previously covered by water, and especially are exposed when it's a warm summer and there's a lot of evaporation, those rocks are becoming dangerous. This fellow, and I'm sure it was a fellow, nobody else would have been as what can one say, foolhardy as to roll through this situation. It was lucky not to lose his prop. And one of the adaptations that the folks who live in Fort 7, who have to get to the bay, and not Fort 7, Pewanak, who have to go up the Winnisk River and get to the bay, which is now choked with glacial boulders that are rising at an even greater rate and choking the river. They don't use motors with vertical props any longer. They use motors that swivel up, so that they can adjust them as they drive through the rocks that are part of the living land. I'm going to whistle along here because I'm sure we're getting quite late. This is a heavy rainstorm coming into Fort Hope, coming into Yubmatung. Heavy extreme rain events have not yet become part of what people in the north speak about as more frequent, but they do occur. And one went through very close to, well, yeah, it's a couple of 100 kilometers, I guess, from Fort Hope and Martin Falls back in 2002. This caused severe flooding in the south of those communities, and the projections for the future. Dick Peltier and his group at U of T have worked up these projections. This is 6 inches a day in these red areas, and I'm just going to take the phone off. 2 seconds, excuse me. Sorry about that. That's part of working at home. Fort Hope is just about right in the middle of one of these red patches, which isn't to say that these red patches will constantly be in the same place. They won't. They'll shift from year to year. And this is low rainfall. This is heavy, intense rainfall. So that shifting pattern is going to affect the far north. Fort Hope is going to be involved in that, and these once in 50-year extreme events will become, on average in the north, more frequent. But my goodness, south of the Great Lakes, it's going to be a much bigger problem. Part of what we did is we of course talked with communities and community meetings, and we're engaging with communities, and what we did was we translated science information, science graphs and plots and so forth, into a format that was understandable and appreciable by the it could be understood easily understood by First Nation people. So we did these what we call lifetime plots. Then and now and future, and you can see what they do. They convey the information very clearly, and we had a variety of these, and I'm sure there are some others that'll come up in the next few minutes as I come to an end here. There have been some fire is a very serious risk in the north, and is becoming a worse risk, and part of what First Nations found they were banned from doing by the Ministry of, I think it was Natural Resources, some years ago. They've reversed this now. They banned what they call prescribed burning, which is when First Nations burn the grass in their communities, between the homes, burn it, because what happens is that embers from fires in the bush at a distance will get blown into the community, land in the grass, and set it aflame. And that's part of what happened. And people in Fort Hope speak about how in one of the fires that came close to their community, there were embers that got blown across the lake. So this is not just blown a few feet, but blown across the lake. Part of what's making fires more of a danger is the warmer summers with very little increase in precipitation in years when there is an increase in precipitation, maybe 10%, something of that sort in summer precipitation. But there will be some years when there's drought, and that means that the leaf litter becomes very dry. And when one of those storms comes through that we just talked about, those 1 in 25-year, 50-year storms come through with lightning, then there'll be fires. We have a map that we made of around KI, Big Trout Lake, Kitchener-Makezib in Inuvik, that is it's almost like a pizza with the meat of the pizza being the fires surrounding the community. It's just amazing that they haven't been burned. They've been evacuated. Fort Hope's been evacuated. Pekanjikum's been evacuated in 2 years, 21 and 19, and that's that's 2,000 people. And anyway, we won't talk more about the details, but the fire is a huge issue in the future for the North. And it's the folks who are susceptible, those with asthma are susceptible to the smoke that are most at risk. This fire east of Yabmatung was very possibly caused by misbehavior at the dump, and that happens too. And it's part of life. Anyway, it led to some evacuations. This is actually the evacuation of 2011 and not 2006. And there's another of those lifetime plots to do with winter rain. I want to come now to the last part of what I want to talk about. One of my heroes is Albert Marshall from Escazone, whose wife unfortunately just died a couple of years ago, who was a faculty member at Cape Breton University. Albert Marshall wrote a book called Two-Eyed Seeing, and some of you may have come across it, and you may have come across articles about it or presentations of his. This is a photo that I took at a conference in Winnipeg, and actually Henry Lickers was a speaker at the conference too. I learned so much from Albert Marshall, and this conference was about 18 months into the work that we'd been doing, writing reports. So what can one say? My brain was receptive. I understood what Albert was speaking about, and it was so impressive. I got him to autograph a program from some work that he'd been doing out in Nova Scotia, and I still have it. I still have it. I treasure it, and this really is what I think for our work is at the core of the best of two worlds. It's what you see if you look with a Western science eye, and with the other eye you understand how to look with an Indigenous way of knowing. And this is how it was summed up by someone who spoke very recently at MIT, who presented on Two-Eyed Seeing. In my world, the difference between seeing in a way that is different from the way that a scientist sees, that I learned from people like Xavier and from the others that I had a chance to talk to in the North, is that what they see is not a fragment of what is going on. They see an integrated picture of what's going on, so that Xavier will tell me about how the spawning of the pickerel is going by looking at the leaves on the trees. Are the leaves out or are they not out? And we will hear about the bee populations falling, and that will be integrated with the difficulty in finding berries, and it's the integration of one observation with another that turns into a different way of seeing, and pointing their finger at and looking for those ways of integrating what is happening on the landscape, and the fact that they live in the landscape, and the fact that they regard themselves as part of the landscape, and not just the landscape, but they look at the animals, the creatures as their kin, which we didn't do in Sudbury. And it's a different way of seeing the relationships in the world. It's as though your environment around you is your living room, and you want the relationships with all of those in your living room to be friendly and to be reciprocal, and to be showing responsibility to them. And we don't have time to talk about the details, but there really is some enormous value in that idea of it not being what the First Nations can tell you, but it's the way that the First Nations see the world, the natural environment around them. And his wife was a faculty member, and between the two of them, they put together this integrative science program at Cape Breton U, not mushing up the two knowledges, keeping them separate, but bringing the knowledges together, as you see there. And that's and the word I took away from his presentation in Winnipeg was collaboration. Collaborate, he said. You need to work together. And that became our watchword for all of the years that we've ever worked since. And we've called our project a collaborative project when we officially went to NRCan for federal support. And the way that we spoke about it with the tribal councils, it's collaboration. What we're trying to do is to contribute our knowledge to your knowledge, and together what we can do is we can build the capacity in your communities, in your First Nations, in your tribal councils, to be able to adapt to the impacts of the weather in the future. And I'm really going to whistle through very quickly here. We had a whoops. That's my timer telling me that I should be done very soon. We were able to hold a conference in Thunder Bay at the end of our 2 years working with the reconciliation ministry. And as you can see here, 300 people from 42 First Nation communities in the north. That's over half of the communities, and that's a lot of people. And we had young people, we had community leaders, Miss Anabi Cree here, we had elders and chiefs. It was a very, very successful conference, and was a building block in building a network of communication amongst communities. I also had a chance to speak with people in communities. Most of the time, the knowledge gathering for the reports was done by well, in fact, it was never done by me. It was done by a community member whom we paid to do it. This is a conversation that I had in Sandy Lake. Richard Kakagamek told me how when he went hunting with his father, when they'd go for a week, and if they got an animal on the first day, they could just bury it in the ground, and it would be cold enough, the ground would be cold enough that it would still be fresh when they came back. But Percy Ray is now in his 90s, and he is famous for growing potatoes. He had about a couple of hectares of potatoes, not just a little patch. But part of what they were talking about was the way that community members in Sandy Lake had been experimented with for genetic experiments and for what you might call health experiments. Just disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And Travis Hay, I think a faculty member now at Lakehead, has just written a book about the thrifty gene that we don't have time to talk about, but it used Sandy Lake people as experimental subjects. And that's happened in other places in the north too, and has bred mistrust. And that's part of the context, the part of what one needs to know about and understand when one's working with communities. And there are so many instances of that. Another community we went to, and I really do promise, no, I'm going to wrap up soon. Another community we went to is indeed Big Trout Lake. Kitchener-Makers have been in a wug. And I spoke with the council members there. I'd seen the council members before on a poster because they went to jail. That's them in their orange jackets there, their orange suits. They went to jail for blockading Platinex from accessing an area to prospect and eventually to mine. And this is the consequence in Toronto. There was a major protest. And part of what one needs to recognize is that the what can one say? The right to make decisions about what goes on the land is part of what First Nations resent being taken out of their hands. And let's leave it at that. But that's a major irritant, at the very least, that's in the north. We spoke with school children there. We took in these little Wi-Fi microscopes that we have, which are wonderful. Kids can look at things and look at shells. They love to poke them in each other's ears and look at what's in their ears on the iPad. Wi-Fi microscopes. We found them very, very useful. This is Chantal Sarazan-Delay, who's on our team. One of the people that we spoke with was Josiah Begg. He was 14 years old at the time, and we were going to employ him that summer. He was so determined to be a marine biologist, a very bright young guy. 3 weeks later, dead, drowned in the river in Thunder Bay. He went down there to keep his grandfather company, who needed to go down for some medical reason. Another First Nation kid, a 17-year-old girl, Tammy, I forget her name, also that day or on that same weekend, dead in the river. Some of you may know a book called Seven Fallen Feathers that has to do with the 7 children, again, all of them Indigenous, pulled dead from the river in Thunder Bay since 2000. You know, the Thunder Bay Police has just been announced on the radio as being investigated for racism. That when you have to go to school in high school, if you're going to go to high school from a community in the north, you have to go to either Sioux Lookout or Thunder Bay. Those who go to Thunder Bay are terrified of this kind of racist discrimination and being found dead. I mean, it's an abhorrent and awful situation. And these are the Bear Clan patrol volunteers looking over the river for kids in the river. Can you imagine having to do that? This is the residential school in Fort Albany. And the photo on the right is one that I took when I saw it for the first time. I thought it was a hotel. There was still a nun living in it. And you'll see the sentence below. The Edmund Matatawaban was awarded the Order of Canada just 3 years ago, and it was actually presented just 3 years ago last weekend. And for writing the Up Ghost River book, you should read it. It's horrifying reading, and you have to have the stomach for it, to be honest. And that's the next photo of the residential school. The community just burnt the damn place. There's a garden there now in the grounds of the residential school, serving the community well. The residential school even kept cows out there, I understand. It's quite a big area of good land. And one of the community members, Gigi, and I forget her family name actually, I just know her as Gigi, has led the garden effort in Albany, Fort Albany. The school has a greenhouse, very good greenhouse. I'm pretty sure that's Megan Moulton from U of T, from the Scarborough campus of U of T, who's worked in Fort Albany, assisting with the development of their garden. This is one of the benefits of climate change, although gardens grow well even above the Arctic Circle. And there's a family garden. Gardening in Fort Albany is caught on. It's beginning in other communities. There are even gardens in Fort Southern, right up on the Hudson Bay coast. People growing potatoes in tires and building up tires in tiers, so they get families of tomatoes at each tile level. So we're building capacity. This is our team, plus the coordinating panels are members of the coordinating panel, Roger and Barb and Lucas and Laura, who are senior members in the band offices, who are the co-leads in this project. Co-leads. This is a collaborative project with co-leads. This is not us popping in with top-down solutions. This is a co-led project, and this is part of what we're doing. We're developing co-led resources on these topic areas, and you recognize them without me running through them. And part of what we've done is we've developed graphics to be used as posters on walls at community meetings, or to be used as handouts on flooding and all of those topics that you've just seen. Some of them are empty of messages, so that community members can write in their own suggested adaptations that respond to the climate change and impacts on the land and impacts on the community. We're not asking them to fill out a spreadsheet or do something that's academic, but in fact to imagine their community. These are imaginary interactive graphics. And on the back is information. And we've spent a lot of time making sure that's plain language. And we co-develop these so that we meet weekly with our First Nation team, and they comment on the graphics, they comment on the layout, they comment on the words. These are co-created, and we have a whole suite of these now, ready to be used when we can get out after COVID, and the climate change specialists especially can get into their communities after COVID. We have an adaptation framework for communities to use. We have a Facebook knowledge exchange group, so we're building up communication, and Vivian Vaswa is the Sioux Lookout Shibogamo climate change specialist. Roxanne down on the right there is the Muskoka climate change specialist. We've written what we call info sheets, 55 of these now, on various topics that have to do with the impacts and benefits or otherwise of climate change. We have a website, and we've run a speaker series, and everything has to be visual. So you take a paper like the one on the right and turn it into a visual piece of communication, and then it can be useful. And then we take these awful graphs on the right and plots on the right and turn them into something more understandable. And PICA as a whole is then developing this GeoHub, which will be an Esri-based GeoHub, and we're just on with that. Unfortunately, the story maps that we'd hoped to include with First Nation people, we've not been able to do because of COVID difficulties. We're just doing a climate change series, explanatory handouts that could be used in community meetings or schools. This is what is climate change, as you can see. We're just actually at the very moment debating and turning over the wording on the back. We just had a discussion this morning with our climate change specialists about the wording of how do air patterns and ocean currents impact climate. We're going to have to revise that paragraph. And I want now to end up by simply giving you your homework. I want you to read Braiding Sweetgrass, or I want you to go to the YouTube piece here, and I want you to listen to Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is, in my mind, the next generation in a way, or a sort of an Albert Marshall. But she's a faculty member. She's a botanist, actually, a very good botanist, holds a research chair. So good to listen to. And what she says, and these are the last two slides, and I'm thinking of Sudbury and reclamation. It's not the land that's broken, it's our relationship to the land. And that's what's different. That's what's different about the way that we look at the world and use science to see the world, and the way that First Nations see the world. They have a relationship to the land, which we don't. And as she looks at regreening, what she sees is she sees the science approach, the reclamation, the ecological restoration, and then the necessity for the biocultural restoration, the reciprocal restoration, which respects the land and the creatures on it and the living things on it as part of our kin. If only we had that kind of relationship, our world would be much more sustainable and much healthier. And I'm going to leave you with this. It's Ernie Thomas in Fort Severn with a mammoth tooth that he found when he was out hunting. He also found a couple of tusks, but he couldn't bring them home. And when he went back, they'd washed away, so he didn't get them. But he did get this tooth. And I show you this not just because mammoths were in Ontario not that long ago, but because I said to Ernie, hey, can I buy that from you? I'd love to be able to show people down south. I'd love to get it carbon dated and so forth. And Ernie said no. And do you know why he said no? He said no because I want to use it to tell stories to the kids in my community. Thanks.
Thank you, David. And for those still on the call, I think you've seen an excellent demonstration why the Royal Society of Canada honored David with their McNeil Medal for Science Communication many years ago. We only have a few minutes for questions, I'm afraid. So I'm gonna, David, if I can, give you the questions that have been asked multiple times during the call. And there are two. The first talks about relationship building as a key issue that you mentioned we need to work on going forward.
Yep.
So there are skeptics out there about relationship building. So how, when we're so far apart physically, and it takes so much time, but most importantly, that there are skeptics that don't understand the importance of it, how can we convince people that it's the most important thing we need to do?
I think those who believe that it's important to do should just do it. I don't think, for example, we should hang around waiting for the climate change deniers to get on board. I don't think we should wait for those who are skeptical about relationship building to get on board. We should just do it. We should just do it. That's my answer. If you've got an opportunity, do it, and show that it's healthy. Show that it leads to sustainability. Show that it leads to respect and healthy a healthier province or a healthier world. Do it.
And do you think that's the most important thing we need to do? I'm thinking now how to educate non-Indigenous people, us colonizers. Is it the most important thing for us to learn?
I think that it works the other way around as well. I was asked actually just 2 days ago if when COVID restrictions are off, I could visit the Muskoka schools. And the reason that they would like me to visit the Muskoka schools, this is up James Bay, up to Hudson Bay, is that they want their students to know how to go to university, to know how to qualify to go to university, because they want to collaborate. They want to understand the Western science way of looking at the world, just as Albert Marshall said we should, at the same time as they don't lose their Indigenous way of seeing. I think that I'm pleased that I spent my time actually out there trying to implement the and to learn the principles. I mean, there's no textbook for this. You know, you need to go with an Andy Fion. You need to meet a Xavier. You need mentors. You need to be rubbing shoulders with people whose intuitions and whose experience can help you do it. I think that there's a very, very important awareness piece coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I do think that there needs to be a much greater effort to not to I suppose to persuade white settlers, but to make white settlers like me aware of what I didn't know. As I said, I didn't know anything about residential schools for 35 years when I was here. And we need to do that in the schools as well. That's where we need to start.
The first half hour of this talk that you gave could have been given by Xavier. So it was tragic that you said that Xavier had passed away. Could you tell me what he got out of this work, or do you know? And why was he so interested in participating?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've not thought about it, but I think that Xavier valued for example, the plant knowledge that we were able to bring. When we made those posters, we identified his plants. We found them in catalogs and gave them names and so forth. And he regarded that as a contribution to his knowledge. And I think that Xavier gained satisfaction from thinking that the work that we were doing together was not only going to benefit his community and provide them with the insights that they need to be able to talk to the Lake of the Woods Control Board about the way they control their dam and the way to look at protecting their probable floodplain. I think that he thought that this would contribute to his vision of a community that would be from where young people would be able to benefit from learning science and combine it with their own knowledge. But I never asked him why he spent so much time with me, but he must have had some vision of how this was going to benefit his community and others.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I have to cut off the questions at this point because we're already a bit over time. And I want to thank you, David. That was everything I hoped it would be. I'm learning every day from you, and I'm going to turn now to John to tell us what's coming next. Thank you on behalf of everyone, David.
It was my pleasure. I'm sorry I was so long. I knew I would be long, but I just said to heck with it. I got to get this in.
David, I'd like to thank you as well. Just a few more comments from the chat that because once we turn off the webinar, you can't see the comments, but just, fabulous presentation, sincere thanks. Awesome presentation. Thank you so much, David. Wonderful presentation and stories. So, I mean, just a lot of great comments, David. So thank you very much. It's certainly evident that you care about your work and the subject, and we've got a long way to go. And this was a great presentation. You might have went a little longer than normal, but who cares? It was great. And thank you so much for that. We had over 120 in our audience today. So again, amazing level of engagement. So our thanks to you again and to our audience. Sorry, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that I deliberately put my email on the front slide so that if people would like a version for their school or for their community, or they want to hear bits of that again, I'm happy to go anywhere. And
yeah, there was one question about the climate change adaptation documents. Are they public?
No, none of those are. The reports we wrote, no, none of them are public.
Okay.
We academics do that sort of work in order to be able to publish things and build up their resume. We weren't doing it for that. It was done for the communities.
Okay. Well, again,
I will say there is one. We made up a fictional report, which I can send to people, which isn't for any specific community, but it combines elements that came from several communities, which will give someone a very good idea of the content of the other reports. So I can send that.
Well, that would be wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much. And again, thanks to our audience. Next week we have Dr. Henry Lickers and his talk, The Many Worlds of Knowledge. So that will be the final presentation in this series, and we certainly look forward to it. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Dr. David Pearson, and have a good evening.